Arthur had woken up in a hotel, having had a horrible nightmare. It had been very real in great detail. On it, the door lock oozed blood. It was the door that communicated with the room next to it. It was closed. None of the guests could pass from one side to the other. Most likely it was once a large suite, and later they divided into two regular rooms, keeping the door. The blood ran downwards, as if it were a fountain. It was soaking the carpet until it reached the bed. It was hot and very sticky. When the man woke up, he had the feeling that his hands were wet with blood. He began to separate the first two fingers that were stuck together, trying to free them of the greasy substance that held them together. He jumped out of bed and looked through the keyhole into the next room. And there, he could see a troll. He was about 10 inches tall and had a very bright dress. He had a blue face, yellow eyes, and on his head he wore a wool hat with a red pom-pom on top. His legs were short but thick. His arms weren't very long either, but strong. All in all, he looked like a grotesque doll. The troll was eating a lady. Just as Arthur looked through the keyhole, the creature opened its mouth and tore off the girl's head. Then, he brought his blue lips to her neck and sucked her blood. The lady shriveled up like a freshly squeezed orange. Her legs kicked as the creature had an agitated look. When the woman seemed to have lost everything inside her, she was lifted into the air and disappeared in 2 mouthfuls. The troll remained leaning against the wall, chewing patiently and looking around indifferently. Then he bent down and opened his mouth to suck the blood from the carpet. The blood evaporated before his tongue, as if it were a vacuum cleaner. When he finished, he sat up and fixed his eyes on the keyhole. Arthur backed away, crawling towards the bed. The troll had seen him. He tried to reason. That creature couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare. Surely he was still dreaming. He spent some time opening and closing his eyes, but the room seemed normal and remained unchanged. He went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. He looked at himself in the mirror, and seeing that it wasn't enough, he put his head under the faucet, wetting all his hair. Then he lay on his back in bed, waiting for the time to wake up. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door. He got up and it was the woman who was in charge of cleaning the rooms. Seeing that the man wasn't ready yet, she told him that she would come by later to do his chores. But Arthur insisted that she come in, and that he would go to breakfast. As the woman pushed aside the curtains, letting the sun into the bedroom, Arthur put on his shoes and continued to think about the troll. It was evident that this was not a dream. Perhaps everything had been a hallucination. Therefore, he decided not to think about the subject any longer. He gathered up his jacket, his cell phone, and his wallet, and went downstairs to breakfast. That hotel had good service. The breakfast was buffet, and they had many options and very rich. He was about to enter the drawing room when he stopped when he heard some words in the hall. There was a man at reception asking about another room next to his, and if anyone was staying there. The young worker replied in the affirmative with a smile. Arthur tried to sharpen his ears. He couldn't understand the man's next question, but he was able to deduce it from the receptionist's answer, who informed him that a doctor was staying there with his wife. Arthur tried to keep his head away from the troll's image. He had promised himself to stop worrying about it, and that was what he was going to do. He sat down at one of the tables with 3 different dishes: scrambled eggs, sausages with bacon, and some toast with ham. He loved being able to enjoy breakfast in peace. It was his favorite meal of the day. After having something to eat, he felt like having a coffee, so he decided to call one of the waitresses. The one closest to him was tending to another man, so he waited until he was done with him to get her attention. As he waited, he couldn't help but overhear their conversation. This man was the doctor in the room next to him. He seemed like a kind and calm gentleman. He had white hair, thick glasses, and was wearing a gray suit. And once again, he had that troll in his mind. So to keep his head away from that subject, he decided to take a long walk on the mountain next to him. It was a splendid day. Across the mountains was a beautiful lake with blue waters. He made a route of several kilometers until he reached a place that he particularly liked. However, a stream separated it, so he had to go around the entire area until he managed to get there without getting wet, or lift his pants and walk across it. The river there was not very high. However, the detour could be several kilometers. So he took off his pants, lifted his shirt, and crossed the river. He felt like screaming as he came into contact with the water so cold, and the stones sliding under his feet. When he was almost to the other side of the river, a stone made him slip, and he fell backward into the water. He jumped out, frozen and shivering with cold. He wrung out all of his clothes and put them back on, despite the dampness. He went up the slope, and after 2 kilometers it was dry again. The sun was so strong that it had evaporated all the moisture from his clothes. He reached one of the highest peaks and sat down on a stone. He took out of his backpack a piece of bread with chocolate that had softened by the water of the river in the heat. As he savored his sandwich, he felt beaming with happiness. He was sitting on a rock that probably no more than 2 people had ever sat on, looking at a work of art from nature. The rocky forms contrasted with the blue of the river drawing lines. The houses were practically hidden among all the trees. And suddenly that terrible troll returned to his mind. What if that teacher had become that creature? With an effort, he pushed such absurd thoughts out of his head. He got up from the stone and started down the mountains in the direction of the hotel. When he was going to go up to his room, he saw that there was a stir in the hall. People were very nervous, and the police had arrived. Arthur and the receptionist told him that one of the hotel's clients had disappeared. Exactly the wife of the doctor he had in the next room. The police approached him and asked him a couple of questions, as if he had seen something or someone with a strange behavior in the hours in which the disappearance had occurred. Arthur answered, but said nothing about the troll and what he had seen through the keyhole. Of course, they would take him for crazy. It was absurd to mix his nightmares or hallucinations with reality. They would only laugh at him. After being with the police, he showered and went down to the dining room to have dinner. For starters, he chose a piping hot soup. He sat down to eat it when he realized that the professor was sitting opposite again. He was staring at him, and Arthur, spoon halfway to his mouth, was staring back at him. There was a kind of visual recognition between the two of them, like when 2 people look deeply at each other and scrutinize their respective souls. Arthur understood that this man was indeed the troll, and the professor realized that he had recognized him. Arthur put down the spoon and watched as the professor began to grow. His head rose and spread, like a biscuit in the oven. His face turned red, then purple, and finally blue. His body vibrated and rose towards the ceiling. The man looked around him and realized that the other guests were still eating their dinner indifferent. No one except him could see it. He thought that he had definitely gone mad. He got up from the table and walked over to the troll, dragging his feet on the floor. He didn't understand why he did it, but he had to make sure that this was real and not a dream. He stood in front of him and extended his hand, saying goodnight. The troll laughed, spread his shaggy hooves, and took his hand. Then he told him that he would be his next dinner. Somehow, Arthur suddenly found himself in the lobby shaking hands with the receptionist. She told him that his hand was burned, and offered to bandage it. The young woman asked him where he had gotten that burn, and Arthur lied, saying that he had touched the heating for a long time. The woman made a puzzled gesture and continued talking to him. While the young woman made comments about the town, the hotel, and other topics that did not matter to him at all, he continued to think about what he had experienced in the dining room, had given him a burn just by touching his hand, and had also threatened to be his next dinner. The worst thing is that he had remained invisible to the other diners. He couldn't ask for protection, no one would believe him. It was still hard for him to assimilate that this had happened. He was totally scared with the troll thing, but he couldn't admit his existence. He went out on the terrace with his bandaged hand, and there was an American there having a drink. The American began to talk to him about railroads and other topics that were not interesting to him. So he kindly said goodbye to the man and went up to his room. He fell asleep right away. He was very tired after walking all day, and the tension and nerves from the troll. But at midnight he woke up. A wind and hailstorm seemed to have broken out. The wind howled and beat at the window, so he decided to get up to make sure it was closed. Then he lay down again and buried his head in the pillow. On the windowsill, a blue claw appeared. The man, without getting up, noticed how someone entered the room. He turned around and could see it. The monster was growing inside. Arthur wanted to scream for help, but all he could do was make a kind of gasp. Then the only thing he thought about was his rosary. He took it out of his pocket and went through the accounts. For him, it was a kind of sedative when he had insomnia, the same as it is for some to count sheep before going to bed. The troll spread his hands, encircling his wrist. He froze completely, as if he'd tied him up. And then the monster put his hands on the rosary beads. As if pushed by hidden forces, the beads slammed together over Arthur's heart, as if there had been an explosion between positive and negative energies. The troll made a noise similar to boiling and began to shrink in size. He released the man and ran away in the direction of the window. It looked like he had just experienced a burn. He was losing color as he got smaller. When he got to the window, he was the height of a 5-year-old. He scaled the windowsill and launched himself. Arthur got up and looked out the window. He saw him fall on the terrace and go out in the direction of the valley. He wanted to follow him, but he was very dizzy. When he had only taken 2 steps, he fell to the ground in a faint. The next morning, the lady in charge of cleaning his room found him lying on the ground. When they managed to revive him and he came back to reality, he saw that there was a lot of commotion in the corridor. The owner of the hotel was very nervous talking to the employees. Arthur, still dizzy and dazed, approached one of the employees and asked what had happened. The young man replied that the professor in the next room had appeared that night drowned in the lake.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you on the next episode.